So our next speaker, Christopher Veit, Archaeology Project Manager and co-owner, Gathering Waters Archaeology, LLC, will present Hixton and Silcified Sandstone Formations of Western Wisconsin. Welcome, Chris.
I'm going to use this soapbox to my personal benefit. My name is Christopher Veit, and my business partner, Kurt Sampson. The two of us own and run Gathering Waters Archaeology, LLC. And it's funny about archaeology and science, you often don't end up where you expect you think you're going to be. And here I stand before you as an archaeologist working very hard with the Wisconsin State Legislature to not dig. We're working very hard to not dig the mounds, and I don't know if everybody in this room is aware of it, but Wisconsin's burial laws are very much under attack right now by very highly organized and extremely well-financed Walker cronies who have taken it upon themselves to rewrite the burial laws in the state of Wisconsin. And if this is something that bothers you in the least, and I kind of hope that it does, if this is something that bothers you in the least, I would hope that you would reach out to Senator Chris Kapinga or Representative Brooks in Wisconsin. Very interesting that neither one of them have received a single complaint from anybody in either of their constituencies about their burial mounds, but that they are being essentially paid for by somebody who wants to dig burial mounds for the gravel that's underneath it. So. I'm off my soapbox now, but that's what my shirt is about. If you've got questions about burial mounds in Wisconsin, feel free to visit with me afterwards. So, if it's all right with y'all, we're going to start out with a short video.
My basic, most fundamental understanding of what the science of archaeology is. It isn't a static study of a particular culture. That it is it's a way to almost travel through time. That it's a comparison of at least two cultures, and that archaeology is the science of the difference in between them. That is actually what we're looking at. And when we look at a site like the Natural Bridge site, of a certainty that has 500 or 600 generations of occupational history to it, but at the tail end you have white European settlers using it much the same way that the earliest Native American settlers did it. They used it because it was a protected space on an exposed landscape, and that there was something about that locality that had almost a spiritual quality to it because of the natural beauty of that setting. And that drew people to it. The word that I like to use is numinosity. That there is a spiritual locality to that place, and because of that it drew people. And then once it began to drew people began modifying the landscape. And I think that we see that same sort of phenomenon happen in a number of places where people choose to live. People love living alongside of beautiful scenery and alongside of pretty lakes, or places where they can see vast expanses of open area, that draws people to it. And when you have a site like this that has both that natural beauty as well as a particularly valuable natural resource, you're going to find archaeology there.
I like the word numinosity. It's a Greek word, and it has to do with the idea of there being an intelligence or an awareness, something more than just the rocks and the trees and whatnot that are there. That there's a spiritual presence, and I want to, if I can, incorporate that into my talk today to you guys about the Silcified Sandstone Formations in western Wisconsin, and particularly what we're looking at is Hixton Silcified Sandstone. All right, Hixton Silcified Sandstone and other silcified sandstone formation in western Wisconsin. Next slide. As I said, my name is Chris Veit. I'm from Gathering Waters Archaeology, LLC. Myself and my business partner, Kurt Sampson, work primarily in Wisconsin, although we do travel a little bit. I'm a field archaeologist. My work falls into one of two categories primarily. I work very hard to preserve burial mounds. We frequently go out and identify. People will call up and ask us to explore the bump in their backyard, and we usually ask them if there's two white pipes sticking out of it first, and then if not, we'll be happy to come out and take a look at what you have, and have helped a number of landowners utilize the law such that if they agree to preserve those burial mounds and have that written into their property's deed, that they no longer need to pay property taxes on that chunk of land, which sounds interesting, but if you keep in mind that the vast majority of burial mounds are associated with water, and a lot of them are along the lake's edges in Madison, that's a lot of property tax to save, and all of a sudden people are very interested in burial mounds. The other thing I do is I dig holes. I do exactly what my daddy did not want to do. I'm a professional hole digger. I've spent a lot of time in school doing it, but I am a manual excavation specialist. So if you got a tough dig, you want to know how to get that out, call me. I'm more than willing to get there and do it for you. So next slide. Any chance that could be slid over a little bit?
Which part of it?
You see how we've lost all of this?
Oh, okay.
Ah, that's a bummer. All right. Well, we're talking about Hixton Silcified Sandstone, and I thought I'd throw up a little bit of copper porn for you guys, just to start the show off right. I excavated this piece at about 72 centimeters CMVD on a stable upland terrace above Silver Creek in Monroe County. And the thing about this piece that caught our attention is that it's annealed. It's been folded and pounded many, many times. But it has a pair of really unusual ears at the bottom. It's broken across the top, and speculation was rampant amongst our crew that this was the remnant of some sort of Plano Clovis type point, but rendered in copper. And I don't know boo about copper, but my imagination was certainly piqued. Yes?
Pictures are often deceiving.
Yes, they are.
But if you declared that was originally symmetrical, and you take into consideration what remains, that would be a very small axe.
It was. I think it would have been pretty small to be an axe, but I think it would have been, if it was a little bit longer, it had made a nice projectile. So.
But on the other hand, don't forget, even today, we use very tiny tools in woodworking.
Oh, sure, very tiny. And when I'm working with children and I'm teaching them about this, they can certainly understand that you can kill large game with large Clovis points, but then I take out a small Honey Creek point and show them something that's as big as the end of my finger, and they're very unimpressed, but I assured them that if I were to press it through their heart, that it would, well, the result would be the same.
You see that little projection on what you were calling the top and I call the bottom.
Yeah, we're not exactly sure, and I don't want to spend a ton of time on this. I just wanted to tantalize you copperheads with a little bit of copper. That's all. Better? All right, next slide, sir. Through the tireless fieldwork of Dylan Carr and Ernie Bozhart and Ryan Letterly, no less than 11 sources of tool-grade silicified sandstone have been identified in western Wisconsin. Hixton is by far the finest quality of the silicified sandstones, and it is followed by another source called the Cataract source, which we're going to talk about here in just a little bit. But you can see that the vast majority, actually all of these, they're all localized to the upper part of the driftless area, and these guys, it's honest field work, and it starts out with the best kind of archaeology, my favorite kind, which is bar archaeology. And you're sitting in the bar and you're asking the guy, hey, have you guys ever come across, oh no, but Tom over there knows where that's at, it's on his property, and that's kind of how these good old boys have gotten around and identified. And these aren't just sources, all of these are mines. They're all places that show activity sometime in prehistory where the rock was being removed. So there are almost certainly significantly more sources of silicified sandstone, but that these are the tool grade sources that we're aware of at the moment. The source of, let me get some business done here. The source of Hixton Silcified Sandstone is Silver Mound, and it occurs in only this one area that was identified by Porter back in '61. The material is a fairly distinctive stone, which has long been recognized as being native to Wisconsin. Charles E. Brown knew that back in the turn of the previous century. And Silver Mound is one of the largest and most extensively worked quarry workshops in the upper Midwest, and we get that from Mr. Bain. Now, at the time that all of these comments were put together, it was known that silicified sandstone could be found in a lot of places other than Wisconsin, but it was assumed that all of it was coming from Hixton, and we are now very recently learning that that may not exactly be the case. But I am telling you, after having excavated 10,000 flakes of Hixton and probably twice that in Cataract, that they're fantastic materials, that they are distinguishable, but you've got to look at them. So, next slide, please. Silver Mound is located between the towns of Hixton and Alma in Jackson County, and I've got the section and township right there. The mound itself rises about 400 feet above the surrounding topography, which it makes it very prominent on the landscape. I think that many of you have been through that part of Wisconsin and are aware of some of the resistant sandstone mounds. This is one of them, but there's something special about this mound. The size of it is a little bit bigger than the average mound that's there, and it's harder. It's significantly harder, which is why it's probably a bit taller. But you can see that there's definitely some topography that's involved, and right along this, and then winding way down through the south end, we have one of the upper reaches of the Trempealeau River, which dumps out at Perot State Park, right next to the platform pyramids. Now, Dr. Bozart will tell you that there's no connection between those two guys. They were just there to take care of the territory, that they wanted to be in charge of the territory, and that they weren't using the material necessarily. And I'm in no position to debate with Dr. Bozart, and I agree with him that they don't find a lot of Hixton at Trempealeau, but they definitely find it at Aztalan. So they were interested in it, and I don't think that its location alongside of the river is coincidental. Next. This is a photo of the original field map that Charles E. Brown drew in 1932, and I don't know how much of it you can actually see from down here, but the upper flat portion of Silver Mound is basically a wing or a V shape. And if you ever are lucky enough to visit it, you'll probably go in at the KOA campground, which is at the base of it, and you'll figure out which of the secret unmarked trails will take you all the way up to the top of this drainage that's here. All along this side appears to be where some of the premium material was being extracted, and it appears to be that is the whiter material. And then all the way around to the back side of this as well, there's the movie that we'd shown at the beginning is actually a mine. It's a place where people were extracting that much material to get at the specific unweathered Hixton that they were particularly looking for. But there's mines and all the way around the perimeter of this, and then well over 1,000 pits all the way across the top of this. Even though this entire piece of landscape is made out of sandstone, there is about a 10-foot layer thick of Ortho quartzite, which is what the Hixton is that they were actually looking for. You can't get at it directly from the top, but you can mine it. You can dig a hole, 2, 3, 4, 5 foot deep hole, and all of a sudden there's the premium material. And now when we go back, we can see you can see the evidence of that all over the place. Part of the reason that this is called Silver Mound is because of the number of pits and obvious mines that were there when white folks first showed up. They assumed that was Native Americans mining for silver, and they started digging their own holes. And so when you go and take a look at it, not all of the mines, not all of the diggings there are prehistoric. But the prehistoric ones have rock that's pulled out and then broken into much finer pieces as though they were beginning the manufacturing process. Whereas the historic mines really are just people pulling out piles of material and tossing it out in front of the hole like scree. It's not a perfect way of determining it, but it would help. But we have a nice map of it from 1932. Next slide, please. We'd seen this image. This is actually what Silver Mound looks like. This is looking south from the north end of Silver Mound, and doesn't look like much. Looks like just a big bump on the ground. I encourage you to use your imagination and wind the clock back. Back in the day, back in prehistoric times, this would have been a prairie, and it would have been a virtually treeless rocky prairie across the top of that. It would have looked very different than it does right now. Next slide. An interesting comparison. We know that lightning is attracted to terrestrial magnetic anomalies. Okay. The Hensler site, 47DO461, is about 200 miles away in southeastern Wisconsin. It also is a paleo site, but it's a multi-component archaeological site associated with a large quartzite landform. It's characterized as a ritual Petra Graph site, and the feature of this, one of the features of this site is an abnormally excessive number of lightning strikes. It appears, and this is according to Dr. Steinbring, that the lightning is being attracted to this quartzite dome because of a small magnetic anomaly that's created by the quartzite itself. Now, this sounds like it's absolutely ridiculous, but how many people out there have a quartz watch on their arm right now? Not as popular as they used to be. All right, your watch is powered by that same mechanism. There's a small battery. There's a copper coil that's around it, and when that quartz is applied to that magnetic field, that quartz begins to vibrate at about 32,000 times a second. It creates a kinetic energy. Okay, he believed that is part of the reason that the Hensler site was chosen. That on a naked and bare landscape, that this one hill that's constantly being struck by lightning certainly deserves to be decorated by our finest artists, or something along those lines. Okay, next slide, please. In ancient times, the Ho-Chunk and their relatives referred to Silver Mound as Waukesha Wajira. Waukesha Wajira, which means where the lightning dances or where the thunderers dance. The thunderers were great, powerful beings, the head of their pantheon, if you will. And I just thought that was really interesting because all of Silver Mound is a giant ortho quartzite, or it's a giant sandstone. It's very similar to what's going on at Hensler, and it just made me wonder when I learned what the name was, if there wasn't some sort of a correlation there. And I believe that there is. Earlier in the movie, I had spoken to you about the numinosity, or the sense of spiritual presence that you can feel when you're walking around at Hixton. And I frankly believe that might have something to do with it. If you ask Bill Quackenbush, he'll tell you that it definitely does. Next slide, please. I postulate that a magnetic anomaly like the one at Hensler can be found at Silver Mound, and that because of this anomaly and its topographical prominence on the landscape, that an unusual high number of lightning strikes occur at Waukesha Wajira, and I postulate that knowledge of this would only add to the reputation of a stone already known for its workability. And that kind of makes sense. I do a lot of hunting and a lot of fishing. I have knives that I use when I'm cleaning fish when no one's looking, and I have knives that I wear when I'm walking around with my buddies. I kind of think that it's a lot like that with Hixton as well. I think that Hixton, while was occasionally used to make utilitarian things, Hixton is used in the very first burial sites that we find in Wisconsin, and has a presence in ritualistic components throughout the entire breadth of Wisconsin's prehistory. And that's not something that other silicified sandstones enjoy. And I speculate openly in front of you if it isn't because of this. Next slide, please. The legacy of this very important site has been preserved. It's been designated as a National Historic Landmark in 2006. The mound has been preserved for future generations, and primarily because of the work of Ernie and Dylan Carr. The site is now owned by the Archaeological Conservancy, which does my heart good. I'm very glad to see that they own it. I believe that this is one of the, if not the most significant archaeological site in the northern United States, and I'd like to see it preserved and get the attention it deserves. The plaque that they have out front designating it doesn't say very much about what it is, and this is right in the KOA campground. So if you didn't know any better, you'd think that the campground is the actual landmark. But they did put a nice, expensive brass plaque there. Next slide, please.
At least it's spelled correctly. So many of those aren't.
The most desirable material at Silver Mound is a horizon about 10 feet thick that's found near the surface of the mound. More than 1,000 pits and mines have been dug there, and although not all of them are prehistoric, like I was saying. And you can see where, in this image, they've left the majority of the overburden, but that they're actually digging down underneath. They're looking for that preferable band of quartzite, Ortho quartzite. Next one. The place is characterized as a quarry, and there's ample evidence of it. I really hope that you get the chance to walk around there someday. Don't take the hike lightly, because there is broken, sharp rock everywhere. But it is a sight to see. I've never been to a site of the 1,000 archaeological sites that I've been to. I've never seen so much debitage. I've never seen so much human evidence. I mean, it looks, I gotta imagine that that's what, I don't know, like rock concert looked like afterwards, except that it's all debitage, and it's everywhere that you look. The site was used continuously and with high intensity for a very long time. Next slide. Mining and manufacturing are evident all over the mound. I have an image here of the Dwyer Rock Shelter, which sounds like it's a place to live, and it's definitely big enough that you could camp in there. But excavations in 73 and 76 by the University of Wisconsin, actually Oshkosh, didn't find much evidence of occupation in there at all. And that primarily what they were doing were that they were manufacturing. They were busting out cores, and then in this instance delaminating it to use those flakes for one thing or another. But I don't believe, and this is my opinion, but I don't believe that there was a lot of people living on this mound. One, because it was a sacred site. Two, because it was prone to being lightning struck. But three, because it was an extremely valuable resource on the landscape, and it wouldn't have been just you and your family that were interested in it. The Hatfields and the McCoys both would wanted to have been there, and I think that by not being there, well, best way to not get punched is to not be there, right? Why would you put your family in harm's way when you could send your uncles over or whatever and collect as much rock as you can carry and then bring it back to wherever you're camping half a day away, and then in a more safe and secure setting begin to work it and do with it what you were going to do. Ortho quartzite is a very pure quartz stone. Hixton Silcified Sandstone is composed primarily of pure quartz sand of extreme age. Here at Silver Mound, windblown silica accumulated for eons and was eventually deposited as a very fine sandstone in a shallow, warm sea. Silver Mound is a Cambrian-aged sandstone and is a remnant of the much larger Wanawak Sandstone Formation. This is some of the oldest rock in the world, but all we have left of it are just little bitty grains of it. These are the remnants of the great Pinokian mountains that rose in Archaean times, more than 3 billion years ago. They were the largest mountains that have ever existed on the planet of the Earth, and they're completely gone. They're now our Ordovician age sandstone. Those mountains were all Precambrian, but the sand and everything eroded, and then during Cambrian times was deposited in very fine layers in warm, shallow seas. Wisconsin at that time would have been about 15 degrees south of the equator and turned a good 90 degrees. It would have looked very different here than it does now. Next slide, please. The Wanawak Formation is smashed between the Tunnel City Formation and then the much older Mount Simon Sandstone. The old Clair Formation is some sort of a geological discontinuity. It appears that during those times that the water level would rise and rise and lower, and there is some speculation that that contributes to the variability of silica in some of our Prehistoric sandstones, cherts, and our silicified sandstones, that for some period of time that these sandy land features would have eroded, and all of that silica eroded into a smaller pit, but then when the water table rose and it became an ocean, that all gets mixed into the ortho quartzite that we end up finding a billion years later, but that might account for some of the variability in the quality of the stone that we see. Next slide. Hixton Silcified Sandstone is so brittle that the grains of the quartz are so well cemented together that when the stone fractures, it fractures through the quartz grains rather than around them. This is the feature that distinguishes Hixton from the other lesser quality regionally silicified sandstones. This provides for a very clean break, a particularly sharp fracture, and also a material that's aesthetically pleasing. makes for a very sharp break. It's not quite as sharp as obsidian, but there aren't a lot of materials in North America that will that'll take a sharper edge than Hixton, and look nice too. Next slide. It's actually a class 1 ortho quartzite, which means that the grains are chemically cemented together. But this is part of what makes it really interesting. We know that it's brittle, like I said, it's a 6.5 to a 7 on the Mohs hardness scale. But the things that bind these quartz grains together are other materials that are associated with silica, and they're things that we tend to, that we tend to think of differently. You wouldn't think that opal would be a component of a toolstone, and you certainly wouldn't think the chalcedony would be either, but the fact of the matter is that they definitely are. They're not in gem quality, okay, but it is exactly the same chemical material, and that is what surrounds the individual grains of sand and holds it in place so tightly that instead of breaking around, and it causes the sand grains to break through. We have a really close-up picture of it from my buddy Kurt. What I want you to see is that as what I'll describe as a typical piece of Hixton, there are no flaws inside of this stone. There's no characteristics. There's no lenses of lifted material. There's no inclusions in it. It's a very, very clean material, and I think that kind of predictability also made it a preferable material. I mean, it had to be the toilet porcelain of the prehistoric age that everybody wanted to chip because every one piece looked like the other. Hixton Silcified Sandstone has been used by people during the entirety of prehistory. I've got a couple of Clovis points here. I've got a Folsom over here. I've got a whole spread of stuff over here, Eden points, and St. Charles. Gosh, what else is all in there? And then I've got a whole bunch of stuff from Mount 72 at Cahokia. Hixton was used almost as soon as it fell out of the front edge of the glacier, virtually. All right, and it gets used and frequently in ritualistic capacities all the way through history. And there's definitely in times in history where it's more important than others. We certainly find it to be used in making bigger tools and whatnot during the earliest part of our prehistory. We get into the Archaic era, and it seems like they're using it maybe more for mortuary applications and building big points to break on purpose. And then we know for sure that it's being used in a ritualistic capacity during Oneota and Upper Mississippian times. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Next slide, please. A late woodland example that I've got for you in silicified sandstone. This is an excavation that I did in Monroe County, and our sidewall came down right across the long arm of a white-tailed deer, and you can see my trowel pointing at it there. And that's interesting to us because we never find remains. The soil is so acidic that stuff doesn't stick around very long, but it has been here for a while. You can see that we have the O horizon above, we've got a very well-developed A horizon, and then it's right at the transition between the A and the B1 horizons. So this is something that's been here for a while. Turn a slide. And we were actually able to determine how long it was there. This was recovered in context with the deer. This is a piece of silicified sandstone. It's a small Madison triangular with an impact fracture on the tip. Now, no one's here to tell us the tale, but we did pull this out of the central part of where the deer was. We're pretty damn sure this is what killed that deer. Yeah, I think it's neat. It's got it's not very big, and we were just talking about that before, but it was very well made. It was all serrated. Some talented artist really did a good job on that.
So is that deer butchered at that site, or is that a deer that got away and died with the hunter?
As a deer hunter, my assessment of the situation is that guy got gut shot and ran away with that dude's point.
Okay.
Next one. Much more was happening at Silver Mound than just quarrying activities, and Hixton silicified sandstone is more than just a tool. Control of Silver Mound would have commanded huge respect in the prehistoric social landscape. Control over its supply would ensure demand and great prestige. This opens up the probability that ritual and social behavior associated with Hixton and Silver Mound would have been commensurately serious, if not sacred. And I think that stands to reason. What I'm saying makes sense. That it was a very serious place, and it was treated very seriously with serious ritual and serious beliefs. Early ceremonial use of Hixton at the Rainier site, which is dated to about 9,000 BP, There's Scotch Bluff points, ceremonial destroyed in a fire in a mortuary style. The stylistic and technical excellence of the Rainier artifacts is astonishing. Outside of some other late Paleo sites, it was rarely equaled and probably never surpassed in the Great Lakes. Somebody took a great deal of time to particularly well make silicified sandstone points, and not to kill anybody, not to hunt or anything like that, but to be broken ritually in a fire, perhaps for somebody to use in the afterlife. But it's just a clear example of Hixton being used in a ritualistic capacity. Ceremonial inclusion of silicified sandstone projectile points in feature 50 at Aztalan, dated to about 1050, compares very favorably to the silicified sandstone. Now this has come up recently because forever we thought that this was Hixton, and at this point we are not sure if it's Hixton or maybe speckled sandstone, which comes from 15 miles to the northwest, but very similar, okay? But something they were very interested in, and these observations seem to imply that Hixton was believed by ancient peoples to have a spiritual quality, and this belief seems to have endured for the totality of Wisconsin's prehistory. And I think that that's important. I think that that's worth considering. Here we've got a picture of a couple of different silicified sandstone points that were taken out of Aztalan. This slide comes to me from Kurt Sampson when he was doing his dissertation. But they were definitely using it. Next slide. But even more than that, we've got about a half dozen of silicified sandstone points in Mound 72 at Cahokia. Now the previous slide and this slide come from features that share a great deal of commonality. My interpretation of them is that they are warrior clan features, and that these are points that were used specifically for warriors. I have had it shared with me in confidence that many people believe that these are specifically people killers. When you take the time to do that try notch on there, and I think that when you add something like that to a magical stone, I don't know, you're working with Excalibur or something along those lines. I don't want to take it too far in that direction, but there's something more to the Hixton than just a source of stone. Again, more than just the recovery of stone at Hixton, it is probably the case that that area was painted with graffiti like any other place that humans have ever lived in for an extended period of time. Unfortunately, we only have one Petra Graph left. It's referred to as the Rainy Day Petra Graph, and it's on the southern end. It's very beautiful, it's very difficult to see, and even in the past 10 years, this image has diminished greatly. If you look at older images of it, you can see quite a bit more of it, but an interpretation that I have had shared with me is that this is rain coming down and that these are thunder beings across the top, and I think that that sort of stands with the name that I shared with you, where the thunderers dance. Next, please. Now I want to talk a little bit, questions about Hixton. Yes, sir.
Just throw a quick comment here, I guess.
Please.
If people want to see good hands-on examples of Hixton and plus Cataract, you're going to see here the displays that I brought along from the Silver Lake area back in Marquette County has display cases, or two of them out there that have a wide range of Hixton, both its projectile points in particular, but some other artifacts as well. So.
Please look at it if you haven't seen it. Hixton it's very pretty, and all of this blah, blah, blah that I'm telling you about it being opal and chalcedony and everything. If you can see a nice piece of Hixton in raw sunlight, it's absolutely gorgeous. It sparkles. It's got some luminescence to it. It's translucent to about 5 millimeters. So when you hold it up, it's got it plays with the light. I mean, it's a pretty interesting material, and none of that is true of what we're about to talk about. We're going to talk about the Cataract site. Now, the Cataract site, I have significantly more personal experience working with the Cataract site. I have worked on the mines, and I have excavated a number of sites in close proximity to it. So it's something that I've seen quite a bit, although we also find a lot of Hixton in Monroe County as well. So quite a bit of it. But the one thing that we don't see, that I don't see, and when I've kind of cursorily asked around amongst other archaeologists, no ritualistic component to cataract. We don't see it being used in mortuary complexes. We don't see it being used in places, we just don't see it being used the same way. And what I'm going to propose is that something like Hixton, that's the nice china that you bust out for special occasions, but this is the stuff that your Faber wear, or whatever. Next stone, please. Next one, please. Cataract silicified sandstone is a middle quality silicified sandstone. You can find it along a handful of resistant ridge tops in northwestern Monroe County. Excuse me. It's composed of fine to very fine grains of sand, and it ranges in color from pure white to tan to actually purple, a bright purple, as a matter of fact. It's kind of interesting. When cataract fractures, it often fractures around individual grains, resulting in a sharp edge, but not nearly as sharp as the cataract silicified sandstone. And you can't really see it when you're looking at this, but if you can, and we'll see a close-up of this, the top piece of debitage that I have, you can see that there's places on that the material is inconsistent, that it isn't nice and smooth like that first piece of Hixton that I'd shown to you that was banded in different colors. This has got a heavier grain, and I think that it wasn't as desirable because of that. This is the same material at 10 power, and you can see that it's full of inclusions. Those are all things that would cause stone to break slightly unpredictably, and none of this is stuff that you find in Hixton. Next, please. This is an example of a serrated Madison triangular that I excavated. The point was recovered very closely to the cataract source, and like all of the artifacts that you'll see here, they were all excavated under the supervision of Colorado State University and are all being curated at the Mississippi Valley Archaeology Center. Next one. This is a piece of purple cataract. Very interesting, because this is a Madison triangular, except that it's got a basal impact scar on it. So I don't know, maybe that one didn't get away because we didn't find any deer guts with it. Next one, please. One of the things that I've been lucky enough to be a part of is 2 years ago I was involved in the discovery and recovery of a silicified sandstone cache. I believe that I am one of 3 archaeologists, please correct me if I'm mistaken, but I believe I'm one of 3 archaeologists in the state of Wisconsin that have recovered a cache under archaeological circumstances. Obviously, other caches have emerged, the Creasel cache that everybody's heard of, but I think that was pulled out of a hole by a cowboy that wasn't sure what he had. We were able to measure the dip and strike of every single one of these. We were able to categorize all of the other material that came along with it. We had soil samples that came along with it. We had points that came along with it that really helped us to tie in the fact that it's a multi-component site. There was a lot of information that came out of this other than just the tool blanks. Next slide. But this is the actual test unit that it occurred in. And there you can see me taking a nap with my paintbrush here. The vast majority of this was dug with a paintbrush. It was a long day, but we took very precise measurements of every single thing that we found in there, so that it could be used for research later on. And I want to give some great credit to my digging partner, Megan Caston. Megan is actually earning her PhD in Scotland right now, but great archaeologist, great digging partner. Next slide. There we are up close, and we had only, at this point, we did not know that we had a cache. We knew we had a couple of points, but you can see 2 of those tool blanks exposed at this point, so we knew we had something interesting. We didn't realize that we'd actually had struck gold. Next one, please. This is what the blanks actually look like. 22 of them, and then again, this is from the cataract source, and I think that this substantiates the behavior that I described, that you wouldn't live at Silver Mound. I don't think that you would live at Cataract. I think that there's a lot of people that were very interested in shopping there, and that not all of them got along. And so I think that what they would do is that they would go there, they'd pull out as much rough stuff as they could, and they would rough it out so that they could just check the basic quality of it, and that they would bring that back to their camp, and that they would then cache it. They'd carry as much with them as they could, cache the rest of it for lean times, or hoping that they'd come back and get it eventually. And I think that that's exactly what we're seeing in this cache. Charcoal recovered in direct contact with the cache returned an AMS2 Sigma Cal of right around 2,000 years old. We had another AMS done that brought back a pretty similar date, pretty definitively placing this site on the transition between the early and middle woodland traditions in Wisconsin. We can see the cache emerging here. The name of the site is Ranch-3. It's about a 2.5 acre multi-component site. The artifacts recovered from the site also included Plainview points, Fox Valley truncated point, barbed one actually, and some Durst projectile stems. Ceramic types included Marion Thick, Lynn, and Madison wares. And then, of course, we had 22 Cataract preforms. Next slide. Here's a little bit more of it with the bulk of them exposed. And in conclusion, western Wisconsin silicified sandstones were a preferable lithic resource in the prehistoric economies of ancient eastern North America. Hixton silicified sandstone was a particularly sought-after material, and it seems to have had a long-standing ritual component that is conspicuously absent from Cataract silicified sandstone. Next one. Thanks for your time and attention, you guys. I really appreciate it very much, and I'm honored to have spoken to you today. Thank you.